First of all, Shawn, thanks for being on the podcast. It's a big day for you. Your book launch comes out today. You just announced the new website, meetrx.com. So fit me in for a podcast is quite an honor. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Kevin. And I really appreciate what you've done for the community as well. You've been a great source and wealth of information. And I've heard people constantly referring to your stuff. So I think it's just great to be on the podcast. And yeah, it's a hectic day. I'm like multitasking and doing everything possible because I'm getting a lot of stuff sent my way right now. But I absolutely glad I got to take the time out to chat.
Cool. So before this morning when I got up, I asked the social media universe, I told them, we were going to have this podcast and just to get people's questions about the book specifically, and then just questions for you in general. So I got a good long list here of questions from the social media people. But so the first chapter in your book is called My Story. So it's your story. And there's a question about your story. The book came in last night, so I've not had a chance to read it. So No spoilers for me. But in that chapter, there's a question about your story that I'm very curious about. So I guess it's been over 3 years ago, a friend sent me a message and he said, "Man, there's this doc on Joe Rogan who's eating a diet just like you. Have you heard of Dr. Shawn Baker?" And at the time I had not. So, I watched Rogan and, I didn't even know there was this name, the Carnivore Diet. And maybe you came up with that name. But ever since that podcast came out, it seems like there's this strange, diet that I was tinkering with. It became like a movement. It's still a small movement, relatively speaking, to maybe the plant-based diet movement out there. But was that kind of would you say, impetus for just massive growth or what?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I kind of, I guess, coined the term the carnivore diet. A lot of people were calling it, the zero carb diet.
Zero carb, yeah.
And that's, those are guys, credit to guys like Charles Washington, those guys that started their Facebook group 10 years prior. And I found that name confusing because, there are a lot of things that are zero carb that aren't.
It's really, not, yeah.
Because corn oil is zero carb. So,
right.
So I kind of just said, well, I'm just going to call it, carnivore is it's more of a more catchier name, I suppose. It gives you the idea that you're basically eating meat, and I think that's what it really is trying to imply. And there's people that will say you don't have pointy fangs and claws, and that silliness that we hear from sort of the vegan folks. But as a physician, as a pretty decent athlete, as someone who's training pretty hard and demonstrating that you could do pretty well, and obviously doing very publicly what other people think is a little bit on the crazy side. Yep. I guess I got the attention of Joe Rogan somehow, and he just invited me on the show. And obviously, he's got this monstrously huge platform. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate it because I was like, I didn't really pay attention much to Joe, and didn't really know the influence he had. So I just went up there and kind of chatted, and made a big deal out of it. And obviously, it got a lot of attention, and then it's just kind of spiraled from there. And I've kind of become sort of a de facto figurehead for this movement, so to speak. And I'm doing my best to try to promote it, to as many people as possible. And so, it's growing really in an exponential rate. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah,
that's what's really propelling this. And I think we're going to continue to see further and further growth in this area. I think the upside growth in this is pretty unlimited for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention is, so something about you that just strikes me as much as anything is, and maybe it's a natural inborn character, but like you are a phenomenal leader. Meaning, because I think we see on social media, we see, the Shawn Baker who's incredibly intelligent, very articulate. You practice what you preach, which I think are all qualities of a good leader. But maybe what people don't see behind the scenes is that, you are messaging, calling up, whether it's doctors or influencers, and really rallying the troops. And I think like a distinguishing characteristic of a leader is someone that does, rallies troops around a mission. And I think, if nothing else, that is why you've become so much of the face of this carnivore movement, is you are just a phenomenal leader. So is that a natural quality or just something that comes with when you're inspired with a mission?
Well, I think there's a little of both. I mean, obviously, I spent time in the military learning to be a leader. I mean,
Yep.
I was a lieutenant colonel, so you do have people under you. I was a head of my orthopedic department, so I've kind of had that role in the past. And like I said, I think that you are right. Nothing sort of moves masses like people that practice what they preach and
Yeah.
can be an inspiration. And I've known from the beginning that what I was doing was very much controversial, and I needed support. And so I tried to, gather support and try to embrace and empower people themselves to step up. And I think that is what's sort of, kind of allowing this to happen. And, like I said, I do a lot of things that are, I mean, I kind of understand what needs to be done, and I understand there's some hard work that has to be done, and some of it is unpleasant. Some people criticize me for being controversial, and I know that I understand what I'm doing. I understand that that's going to irritate some people. At the same time, the greater amount of people it's going to motivate, and it's going to get the message out there, because this is such an important thing, and we are at such a crucial time in, I think I think there's been a few crucial dietary decisions that have been made, 10,000 years ago when we said we're going to be agriculturalists, and then, arguably when the industrial age came on, and as we see with technology, things happen at a more rapid pace. And so now we're kind of, everything seems to be compressed. And now we're making this great decision that we're all going to change our biology and become herbivores. And I think that is, just incredibly the wrong decision. I think we have to stand up and say something, and not just say something, but be very, very prolific about it, be very aggressive and vocal about it, and say, look, we're not going that route. And I think the nice thing, again, we have these results that, it's hard to deny. People try to deny it and say, well, we don't have a peer-reviewed randomized control trial, therefore whatever you say has no bearing whatsoever. But I think at some point, people with common sense have to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's something going on. And yeah, I mean, I've been very much hands-on. I answer almost every message somebody sends me, which is a daunting task at this point.
I can't even imagine, because it's daunting for me. And then, I mean, your social media presence is
yeah, exactly. And so
orders of magnitude more.
that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this new set, because I can't do it all. I mean, I have to delegate at some point, and I think I'm reaching that point. But I enjoy getting the message out there, and it's fun for me. I think that's the other thing about it. It's fun for me. I enjoy what I'm doing, and I enjoy interacting with people and talking to people. And it's everybody I've talked to has been very sort of open and receptive, and many people are very passionate about this. So it's easy. I mean, it's very easy to talk to people when they all believe what you're trying to. You're not really selling them anything. You're just saying, hey, we all believe in this. Let's make it work. And I think that's the easy part.
And really, results do tend to speak for themselves. So a question I actually got from the social media today is, someone said, I'm healing. I feel so much better. Why am I healing? And this is a loaded question. It's probably different for everyone. But if you were to say, like, why are so many people getting healthy and feeling better? What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I think if we put it in the context of a carnivorous diet or any healthy diet, I mean, you're getting rid of basically poison, and you're eating food. I mean, that's the simplest answer. People say, well, it's only because you remove this stuff. I say, well, that's true, but you're also eating food you're supposed to eat. And I think it's as simple as that. I mean, I think that, we are the only species that has chronic disease, basically. And it's because arguably we've been misclassified on our dietary strategy, perhaps. I mean, I would say, if I were to characterize human beings, yes, we're omnivorous, but I think more importantly, we're facultative carnivores. And, we do better when we eat, high quality, nutrient dense food. And I think that's as simple as that.
Yeah. And when you look, especially, across species, humans and the animals we domesticate are really the only chronically sick animals. So, I mean, that has something to say. We're trying to outsmart nature, but sometimes that can backfire. So you alluded to meatrx.com there, because one of the aspects of your new website is we'll get to the book, but I think it's important to mention this because this is launching today too. So there's some kind of training for people to become carnivore coaches to help spread that word for people who are needing help. Because I can attest to, when people are transitioning or trying this diet out, a lot of times people need help. they're going to have questions. The saying is, carnivore diet, eat meat, drink water. It's a simple equation that is deceptively complex because there's a lot of questions and concerns and issues that arise from that. So this meatrx.com, you're going to have the ability for people to become coaches to help other people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big aspect of it. And I think, and we have grand schemes on how we're going to really move this with technology. And I'm very fortunate. My co-founder, Maza Rostami, is a AI engineer, data scientist. She's very smart. She's also carnivore and very passionate. She's up in Silicon Valley. And so we have a lot of, hopefully, connections in there on how to really, sort of upscale this thing very quickly. But, it's a community. There's a lot of community stuff in there. I mean, I think with diet, yes, there is that transition issue. There's a lot of questions. I mean, still to this day, I get the most basic question. And I think I've been saying this stuff for 3 years, and still I get the what vegetables are on the carnivore. So there's just so many people that haven't reached that I just don't have the bandwidth to reach. And so I think we have to make it accessible. But I really importantly want to make sure people are all on the same page, and we all understand the basic information. So we have a formal training program. We go over the concepts in multiple forms, in written form and video form, with testing and mock interviews and all that stuff to get people certified. So we know we have coaches that are of a certain decent quality, so that when somebody uses them, we know they're going to give them the information that I think is appropriate.
Yep.
And so we've got that going on. And then, I think for people to succeed, particularly any diet long-term, it's nice to have that support. And so we want to give these people, someone to talk to, a month in, 2 months in, 3 months and whatever it may be. So they have that support from a coach that can, maybe it's just somebody you need to, like you're having some craving, or you broke up with your boyfriend, you just need somebody to talk you down off the fence.
Right.
So we want to build in that support, so people just, they make it that critical period of time, and that could be 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, to kind of really sort of get there. And then they change that relationship with food. And it's not that everybody needs to be like strict 100% carnivore for the rest of their life, but I think we've got to get people off the eating pattern that we have, which is so incentivized by our food system and our culture and everything. We can get people away from that. It'll have tremendous impact on their health. But we're compiling. We already probably have the largest carnivore library. All this studies. We've got a great guy, Dr. Phil Ovadia, who's a cardiothoracic surgeon, who's volunteered to help curate all this research that we've accumulating and adding to that continuously. We're going to start hopefully accumulating our own research. There's a study coming out. We're doing a carnivore study, and that's going to be with David Ludwig out of Harvard University is going to do that study. So it's going to be a big impact study. We haven't officially announced it yet, but that's what's going to happen. We've got hundreds of recipes. We got chefs that have created, so people that want a little variety, they can do carnivore friendly foods. We've got all the biggest library of success stories. This is what happens. It inspires people. I took everything from meat heals and the hundreds that were waiting to be published there, and then all the other ones we've come out. So we've got hundreds of success stories. So almost any medical issue you've got, we can show you a success story on that. So that's the spot inspiring. And then, like I said, it's just my goal is to make this as accessible to as many people as possible. And so we're trying to make it affordable. The aspect of coaching is kind of like almost like an Uber driver. You would sort of do it in your spare time. You talk about it anyway. Why not make a few bucks coaching people, helping people, and then we can grow this, and then we can really get it to the masses, because there's a lot of this stuff where it's really expensive, and I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to make it affordable for as many people as possible, because it's really not that complicated. But like you said, there are a lot of sort of just common questions, common issues that I can only reach so many people. And this is why I have to do this, to spread it out as much as possible.
And I think I got a lot of those common questions here, which I want to address. But I want to say, I thought now, and looking back on it, I think it proves true that the meat heals is one of the smartest things that I think you could have possibly done, because stories speak volumes. You can throw out and say, look, here's a study, and really 1 out of 1,000 people are actually going to read that study in detail. But when you have story after story, people that other people can relate to, say, I had that same problem, they got healthy doing it. It's worth a try, right? And I can't imagine how many people that convinced to, give this way of eating a try is just, anecdotal stories are powerful.
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, that's why I started this. I mean, I basically, I mean, you think about it, I went on Joe Rogan and I inspired, I don't know how many people to try it. And then we
Right.
started seeing their success. And it's just, that's how, you're absolutely right. The people that are naysayers are going to say, show me the scientific paper. Well, we're going to have those later. But for now, and by the way, any paper we put up, people are going to disagree with anyway. They're going to say, well, we disagree
Sure.
because of that and that. So ultimately it comes into what is going to inspire the masses to do something. And you think about it, I mean, what is the downside to going out and eating, a bunch of steaks or steaks and seafood and eggs and maybe some organ meats for, a couple months? What is the real downside of trying this? And when you have literally thousands of people have the exact same condition you do, that you've been going to doctor after doctor and being kicked around the medical system, and everybody's trying all these tests and nothing works. And you've got somebody saying as simple as, hey man, maybe you should just change your diet for a few months. Let's see what that does. And then all of a sudden we're seeing people with multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, these crazy things that people are told, hey, you got it for life, it's never going away. And these people are getting better. And I know it sounds like mysticism and there's all these people point out this crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, like I said, the negative sort of, outcome of eating a bunch of steaks is not very bad at the
Right.
The worst, you ate a bunch of steaks,
People think some people think like, oh, if I eat steaks for a month, am I going to have a heart attack? Like, yeah, that's not going to develop in 30 days.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously, and clearly there will be people on a carnivore diet that have a heart attack. There will be people that have cancer. That is just the law of averages and big numbers. And,
Sure.
it's kind of like what you would say is, well, how does that compare to the general population? And my suspicion is we're probably going to see it's going to be much less. I mean, again, that's a little bit speculative on my part, but just because you have one person that has a bad result doesn't mean the whole thing is problematic and
Yeah.
causative of that.
And you'll see things where someone, maybe they did a carnivore diet for a couple of years, but you forgot about the 60 years prior to that where they were eating junk. And it's, you can do a lot of healing, but to erase, 60 years of damage in a year or two is, there's got to be some realistic expectations. I feel like there's some people that contact me that think like, they meet for 1 week and they should be, Superman and jumping off rooftops and flying around. But so yeah, you'll have naysayers for sure, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean that's with anything you do. I mean that's for sure. And I mean, interestingly, and as you probably know, Kevin, there are people that get pretty healthy pretty quick.
Absolutely,
I mean, that does occur. So why it doesn't happen to every single person? Obviously, is going to be what's going on in the whole picture and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've seen people, a week in and are like, my lifelong asthma went away or something.
Yeah, and what I see often is they'll see such improvement in one area that was really plaguing them. And they might have some other things like we could talk about here in a little bit, like, oh, my training performance is down a little bit for a time, but I'm feeling so much better that they're not going to give it up. Sometimes I see something is so vastly improved so quickly that the other things that may take longer to adapt are worth waiting, so to speak, for those things to happen. So you brought up the organs, and I'm not going to say this is the most contentious thing within like this carnivore community, but there's some camps that think like, look, if you're not eating organ meats, you're going to have deficiencies, you're going to have problems. They might not show up right away, but maybe down the road. I feel like we are in a similar camp here, but tell me your stance on organ meats and such.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they're very nutritious. I mean, they, if we want to look at certain nutrients, they contain the greater concentrations. Liver is vitamin packed. I have been fully supportive of people eating that. I think if you want to, it's great. I think for some people there is an added benefit, but the results, and I've surveyed literally 10,000 plus people. I mean, the results don't seem to show any significant advantage in the general population, and therefore I just can't say everybody must do this. I mean, I think it's up to you to individualize and experiment with that. I don't think the lack of organ meats in the diet is preventing you from reaching some next level. I know some people have characterized it as a JV team versus a varsity team.
Right.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, literally, I've sat here for 3 years. I've literally broken world records as an athlete eating nothing but basically steak, maybe a few eggs, without the organ meats. And so I disagree with that. I think it also, if people are told that they have to do that to succeed, a lot of people aren't going to do it because a lot of people just flat out don't like them.
Right.
And like I said, I think the nutritional value of a food you don't like is effectively zero because you're not going to eat it anyway. And if you tell somebody you must do this to optimize or be the best you can be, you're going to turn away 80% of your potential wins. And I think what we need to do is have as many wins as possible. And if we can take, the single mom that's struggling with kids, it doesn't, can't afford access to the highest quality grass finished regeneratively raised meat and organ meats and doesn't like them, or kids don't like them, and you're telling her, oh, well, then just go back to eating your standard American diet. I think there's a much better option. And quite honestly, I think you can go and get, just the meat you can afford. And clearly that's occurring and they're getting healthy. I mean, I've just seen this over and over again. It's not that we should not be promoting, a improvement in our agriculture and our livestock rearing. I think we should be promoting regenerative pasturing and those things. We need to get behind that. But, we have to keep the message separate. We have to say, this is for health and this is for the environment. If you can help with the environment, great. If you can't right now, do what you can, get healthy. If you get healthy, you're helping the environment because sick people contribute to the healthcare system, which puts out 10% of our greenhouse gases.
Right.
So it's kind of like, there's a lot of ways you can do it, but the first thing has to go with helping your own health.
So for people that, they read around and then they're like, okay, I'm concerned about, let's just say, a vitamin E deficiency or some imbalance between copper to zinc or methionine to glycine. What do you tell them? If you're worried about it, eat some organs or don't worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's this sort of concept of, do the basics right and don't sweat the small stuff because you're really starting to get into these tiny things. I look at this when people start saying like methionine glycine. Well, that's based on some rat studies.
Yep.
There was some aging in rats. They had too much methionine relative to glycine, but it doesn't really hold. It's not been shown proven in humans. And we also know that human beings, when you restrict carbohydrates, their glycine absorption rate goes up. And so I looked into this. I said, well, look, when you don't take in glucose or galactose, your glycine absorption goes up significantly, something like 400%. So it's like there are compensations that our body makes when we're eating this food. And it doesn't, when we try to, I liken it to trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. We're trying to make a carnivore diet fit a standard American diet with regard to the RDAs. And I just don't think you need to do that. And so, again, if somebody's showing up with a vitamin E deficiency or a folate deficiency or a vitamin C deficiency, it's not presenting clinically in any way. I've not seen any evidence of that thus far. And so I just have to say, let's see, this is our input and this is our output. And there's 8,000 steps in between there, which we don't know all of them. So all we really care about, all I care about as a clinician and as a person is what's happening to me physically, clinically, performance-wise, function-wise, feeling-wise, body composition-wise. That is the important part. And whether I've got, X amount of my methionine versus glycine, or my ketone level is this, or, my whatever, ultimately that takes a back seat to what's actually happened to you clinically. And I think that's what most people ultimately care about. I mean, if I told you, Kevin, your LDL was, 20 points higher than optimal, and you
it's over that. It's more than 100 over that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever, you know what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, at some point you have to say, what is important to me, today, what's going on with my health. And I try to get away from this. I try to look at a really big picture. And I mean, we've got more access to tests, whether it's lab tests or imaging or monitoring tests than we've ever had, ever. Yep. And it has not made us a healthier society. I mean, our grandparents, as a general rule, their generation was far healthier than us, and they had access probably to a blood pressure and a couple labs, and that was it. And now we've got, 24/7 monitoring of everything. We're hyper-focused. We're anxious. We're apping everything. We're monitoring everything. And I think it's just a lot of nothing.
Yeah. I think my generation is the first generation that has a decreased life expectancy versus our parents. So, I mean, and that's taking into account that, we're smoking less. We have all these medical advancements, and yet we're going to still die earlier, which, what are we going to contribute that to, right? Our food, probably. All right. So we're talking a little bit about lab work there, because one of the interesting thing about a carnivore community, especially, it's kind of like, if you look at the adoption curve, it's like we're at like the innovator, early adopter area of the curve. And I feel like people here are more likely to be measuring and monitoring and testing this and that, which I think comes with pros and cons. But if someone says, okay, I've been eating a carnivore diet for a year, I'm going to get my blood work done. Is there something in particular I should look out for to make sure like I'm not dying that might show up on a carnivore test?
I think that, and again, it depends on the age and the situation. If you're treating a disease, and you should probably measure metrics that pertain to it. I think that just makes sense. I mean, for the average person, I mean, gosh, there's so many like weight to height ratio. I mean, what's going on with your body comp? That is such a huge indicator of chronic, the chronic health that you have, and I think that, coronary artery calcium scan is another one, the carotid intermedial thickness scan, if we're talking about cardiovascular disease. Those things make sense to me. If we start saying, I'm going to measure my blood lipids, and then it becomes, well, what are you going to measure? Are you going to restrict it to the typical HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol, which is very, very rudimentary information. And if one is up, maybe it means something, but you have to get more information.
Right. Maybe it doesn't.
Then you have to say, well, then maybe you don't need to look at your inflammatory status, and then maybe you need to look at your glycemic status. And if you're going to look at glucose, maybe you need to look at insulin, and then it becomes on and on and on. And it's just kind of like like I said, with kidney function, I don't know if I've talked about this a little bit. We see a lot of people on a carnivore diet where their creatinine's up a little bit, or the BUN's up a little bit, or the GFR, it looks like it goes down a little bit. And GFR is based on the calculation from creatinine. So if your creatinine is up, your GFR is going to go down. Yep. And so we can look outside something called a cystatin C, rather. And that is a test that excludes protein intake, because these things are confounded by protein. And so it becomes, the more you test, the more questions you raise. If you're symptomatic, I mean, then that might make sense. If you've got symptoms of fatigue and lethargy, let's say what's going on with your thyroid. If you've got, if there's something that's going on, I mean, if you had some sores in your mouth or something, maybe it's a folate deficiency. I've never seen that occur.
Right.
If you're tired all the time, check your CBC. If you got some kind of anemia going on. I mean, there are potential concerns. People would say, well, vitamin C status might be low, folate might be low, iron might accumulate. That's just not occurring. I'm just not seeing that on any consistent basis. Some people would be concerned about homocysteine, if they've got certain, obviously genotypes, I suppose. But again, you can check it if you want. I've not seen it. And I can tell people, we can check 100 labs on anybody, and we're going to find probably 10 to 20 of them are going to be out of range, just on basis of alone, just on randomization, I guess. And
right.
So, I mean, I really just say, what are your symptoms? What are you checking? And we've got this huge, LabQuest, or Quest, LabCorp. These companies are popping up, and they're happy to sell you tests and make money on it. So we're testing. And these guys are all ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching every time you get a blood test. And I don't know if it's making your health any better, quite honestly.
Right. So one thing that I'm sure you get asked a lot, I get asked a lot, is carnivore and various athletes, whether it's body composition, we'll just call that bodybuilding side, versus athletic performance, like, glycolytic, anaerobic, strength, power. I think the question people have is not, can you do these things? Because, I mean, obviously you can just look, you're alive, I'm alive. So they can be done. I think what people want to know in these questions is this an optimal way to get to my goal? And, everyone's going to have a different goal. But what are your thoughts around carnivore and hitting these performance goals? Could carbs help optimize? What are your stance on those things?
Yeah, I mean, could they help? Absolutely, they could. I mean, I think that's obviously athlete and sport dependent, and it may change in the athlete's life. I'm in my 50s, and for me, I'm very competitive. I want to win world records. I'm going to do what it takes, and if it took me eating, some more carbohydrates in my diet, I'll absolutely do that. As it stands right now, I've done the best of my own personal performance, based on meat. In fact, I'm getting ready to compete at the World Championships in Paris, France, in February. So right now my diet is strict red meat and water, and that's how I overall perform the best, because I feel the best. I don't have joint pain. I don't have digestive issues. I want to train every day, and that's going to cumulatively give me a better result. Now, could I on one day, on any given performance, if I were to carb load and, assuming it didn't mess up my stomach and I didn't have any digestive issues, could I perform slightly better? Yeah, that you can make that argument. I did that for years on a cyclic ketogenic diet. And, what I saw was the performance increase was relatively minimal, and the negative digestive distress was worse for me. So, I mean, and not everybody experiences that. There may be some 25-year-old that's, he's fine. He hasn't had the years of accumulation of damage from a poor diet like I did, for my first 50 years. And so, but I would say that when we define like what is a normal wild human, and I think this is the very important discussion, because I would say a normal human in the wild would probably thrive on relatively fatty meat. Maybe they had some berries and access to a few plants here and there, but the principal diet is going to be meat and probably a fatty type of meat. And they're going to end up with a certain amount of capacity. They're going to have a certain amount of body fat. They're not going to be a shredded fitness competitor. They're not going to be a bodybuilder. And so when you start saying, what do I need to do to get outside of normal human physiology, then I think you have to do things that aren't physiologically appropriate for human beings. And those things may be eating, really, really, really low fat, lean meats. You might be calorically restricting to get shredded. I mean, that clearly, if I want to get really lean, I mean, I eat lean meat and I eat a little less. I mean, that clearly works for me. Do I like doing that? Is it enjoyable for me? Not particularly, not really. Am I happy being, 12, 14% body fat and strong as I want to be and feeling good? Yeah, that's pretty good. And guess what? You can eat as much as you want. And you get to eat nice big ribeyes, which taste delicious. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like that, But, the other thing is what sport. So if we're looking at like weightlifting, it really, the fuel source is not, it's all the creatine phosphate system. I mean, it's all, it doesn't matter how much glucose or glycogen you have for the most. There's arguably a little bit used, but I mean, you're going to have enough.
You have enough to do the rep or the activity, right?
You've got enough to do a snatch. I mean, you're not going to, you got enough to do a deadlift. I mean, for a max lift. So I don't think it's really crucial in those particular sports. When you get into, some degree of glycolytic stuff, and I do a highly glycolytically demanding sport, but it's very short. And I got plenty of glycogen. I've got plenty of, because I'm eating enough protein gluconeogenesis, which we know refills our stores overnight. Unless you're training like 4 or 5 workouts a day, maybe if you're doing CrossFit WODs and you're doing 2 or 3, then it becomes a challenge. I think some of the intermediate distances, like a marathon, like an Olympic marathon at, sub 2:30, or obviously they just broke the 2-minute barrier kind of unofficially, that may require, some carbohydrates. Most people don't need it. Most people aren't doing that. Even guys that are competing in mixed martial arts and some CrossFit athletes and guys like Owen Franks, a New Zealand All Black rugby player, were playing basically with essentially no carbohydrates and doing quite well with that. On the other side, you've got the long distance guys that are doing well. There are plenty of them that are running marathons or ultra marathons even without any carbs. I mean, that's happening. I know Zach Bitter does take a little bit of carbs when he does his 100 miles and breaks records. The optimization thing is something I think is kind of individual. I think many people, it takes a long time for an athlete to adapt in my experience and what I've seen. And it's something that it might take 3 to 6 months to sort of adapt to a low carb or even a no carb approach for athletes. And until they actually do that, their body may not fully adapt to that. And so for me, I still use a lot of glucose. I mean, what I do requires quite a bit of glucose, and I just get it because I eat enough protein. I think that's the difference between the ketogenic diet, which has been studied, to some degree in sports physiology, but it's usually short adaptation time. And I think they're under protein. Those athletes are not taking in enough protein if they're sticking to these 80-10-10 keto macros, which I think is just, short shrifting them on protein. So,
that was my one hard lesson before carnivores. I did a very strict ketogenic diet and I lost a ton of muscle mass in a pretty short amount of time. So, people ask me if they should be restricting protein, and I'm almost in all cases. I'm like, no, not, but I mean, you should be eating fat, but restricting protein is can be quite counterproductive to what most people's goals are.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think there's maybe some medical conditions where being very strictly in
Right.
ketosis and keeping your glucose ketone index appropriate is appropriate. But for the average person, particularly an athlete, I think
Right.
restricting protein is probably, for most people, a net negative.
Yeah. So have you found any, I guess from a macronutrient standpoint, differences between men and women? Because I get this questions a lot. And my experience is the goals tend to be different. So that's why I'm like, they don't do better necessarily on one versus the other macronutrient ratio, but to tailor towards various goals, they might, have different macros splits.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for one, many women come to this diet from a background of salad and fish and lean
Yeah.
chicken.
Yep.
And then when you start saying, hey, try eating a big fatty cut of red meat, a lot of them have digestive issues because they're
Yep.
just not used to that. And so they may have to, the lipases and maybe their gallbladder sluggish or something, something, and they have to that has to kind of kick back in, so to speak. And sometimes it takes a bit of time. And so many women don't feel good on that. They're averse to that. They've been shunning fat for years. And it's not that I'm telling them to gorge on fat necessarily, but you get enough. There are, I guess, again, it depends on the women. I mean, I think there are women that want to be physique competitors, again, same sort of thing as that we just talked about.
Right.
They're going to do better on a higher protein relative to fat ratio. Now, I do think fat is vitally important. We've got essential fats. We've got, you got to get them in. How much is essential versus how much you need to make ketones is probably a little bit different in my opinion.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So it's kind of talking a little bit about transitioning into carnivore. I've written about this in a guide that it got downloaded a lot, and I recommend it just for people that are struggling. Electrolyte supplements, like you said, lipase is bait, some HCl if you need some stomach acid. Are there any supplements that you recommend for people either during a transition or even, long term?
I think that, again, so we have this, it depends on who you're talking to. So there are some people that are, like gastric bypass patients. I mean, these guys have had part of their digestive tract
Right.
out so they don't absorb. So there are certain people that will need to probably continue to take supplements.
Yep.
So if we have a known deficiency, it may make sense to supplement. Now, these may be a candidate for the organ meat situation, because you can pretty much get almost every supplement. I mean, you would think nutrient from animals if you sort of mix it well.
Right.
A lot of people with electrolytes. I mean, this is a really, I think, a really interesting topic, and one I don't think we quite fully comprehend, because some people will do better with a little bit of electrolytes. Some people tend to require a lot, and I think some of it has to do with activity level. I think if you're out training hard, sweating out all your salt, you probably need to replace that. I would say. I mean, and I think, is there a feedback mechanism? Probably for most people, taste is a pretty good guide, but some people need to do beyond that. I know for when I train, particularly if I'm doing a particularly hard session, I'll just sodium, I'll just salt load just because of the fact that in absence of carbohydrates, we have a little less water, and water, particularly as our muscles fill up with water, as our vasculature fills up with water, you train better. And people talk about the pump and they feel better. And so I will do a little salt loading right before I train. I might take a teaspoon and a half of salt and a bunch of water, and that fills me up vascularly. So that can be helpful.
Do you track sodium beyond that?
Do I track it beyond that? No, not really.
Just kind of ballpark for feel. Yeah, you get a feel of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a meticulous tracker person. It's too much of a pain in the butt, So I'm just kind of like, I'm not. Like I said, if I were dialing down for a bodybuilding contest, then that would be a different story. Like I said, I'm focused on performance for me. Yep. I think the other thing, some people like to talk about vitamin D and those types of things, and vitamin K. And so I've kind of got mixed. So the negative of supplementing for most people is probably minimal. There are some people say that some of the supplements and the way they're delivered can be disruptive to the intestinal permeability, because they make these pills so they're designed to be better absorption. They do that by sometimes disrupting our intestinal permeability. So it's kind of like, it can be a problem for people. So some people with autoimmune disease are struggling with that. They may do better avoiding those supplements. Now, other people, This is the thing with vitamin D, and most people don't realize, is vitamin D has pretty significant diurnal variability. And so, because I looked into this, the first thing I do when somebody tells me about a level, I say, well, what's the diurnal variability? That is to say, what is it at 8 o'clock in the morning versus 2 o'clock in the afternoon? And if it's a big difference, man, it could just be depending on the time of the day you took it. So these reference ranges kind of get wonky. And so vitamin D's got about a 30% difference between morning and afternoon. So, if we're going to call 30, and I can't remember if it's nanograms per deciliter, I can't remember the actual units on this, but if we're going to say 30 is normal, the Vitamin D Society says 40, the Endocrine Society says 30, and I think IOM says 20 or something like that. There's all different variations. Vitamin D Society there's probably some evidence that was a little fraudulently elevated. I was selling vitamin D supplements.
Right.
So let's say it's 28 and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm too low. I need to get more sun or take more vitamin D supplements. And then you say, well, why don't you just check it tomorrow, 3 hours later, and now it's 36. And you're like,
oh, I'm good. So,
I mean, it's one of those things where, and the record on vitamin D supplementation just in general has not been good if you look through the literature, so they end up recommending super giant doses because they're like, well, this didn't work. We tried more and that didn't work. So we got to just try so much.
Yep. And
it's interesting. Again, I would put this down and say, I don't think we know. There's data on like Inuit. I look back in this from the 1920s, and they were looking at two different populations of Inuit in Greenland. And one group of Inuit was eating the traditional diet, and they're living in Greenland, so they don't get any sun. So they had relatively low serum vitamin D levels.
Yep.
But they had no clinical deficiencies. Once you fed those Greenland Inuit a mixed diet, we see another population, same vitamin D level, but they added flour and grain and canned goods. Even with the same low level of vitamin D, these people now start developing rickets and other vitamin D deficiency symptoms. So we're like, maybe those levels, even the serum levels, depend upon what your baseline diet is. And so I just think we just don't know the answer. I mean, the safe thing is, if your levels are low based on the RDA, take a supplement. Probably not going to kill you unless you've got some gut susceptibility issues.
Right.
But I'm just like, we just don't know. That's the problem.
Right. And I've been thinking, like, people think about a supplement, only that it could help with, and they don't think about, could this actually be doing more harm than good? And I think a lot of times supplements, at least we don't even consider that downside impact of supplements, like going overboard on things, which I think is actually probably an issue. So as far as your daily food, I think I know it is pretty good, but what's the day in the life of, Dr. Shawn Baker's meal plan?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that I eat to satiety. I mean, I don't have any particular sort of fasting window or anything like that. Most days it's twice a day. I mean, that's just my natural, what works for me. I feel best on that. I eat kind of when I'm hungry. I eat till I'm full. Generally, it's the same because, my days are generally kind of the same thing.
Yep.
I eat, a lot of red meat, what you're looking at behind me. I eat a lot of steak. I eat a lot of fatty steak. Right now I'm eating nothing but that, but this is because I'm training for these championships. But often, I would say if I feel like some eggs, I'll throw some eggs in there. If I feel like some seafood, I'll throw some salmon, some shrimp in there. Sometimes I'll have a little bit of dairy, but truth to be told, dairy for me is something that if I eat very much of it, I just feel just not as good.
Yep.
And it's not that I have a horrible reaction or anything. I just feel my body I get a little fatter. I don't feel as good. So I tend to minimize that. Sometimes I'll have spices in my food, particularly if I'm going out. I don't freak out if I go to a restaurant and they threw some herb butter on the steak, I'll eat it. Right. I'm not at a point where I get some sort of horrible reaction if I do that. But I honestly, and people ask, don't you get bored of that? And the answer is, I mean, I literally look forward to every meal. I'm literally like, my dogs, when I feed them their meat in the morning, they're like the happiest creatures on the planet. I mean, they're jumping up and down, they're salivating. And
that's how you feel.
I'm cooking my steak, dancing around, I'm drooling a little bit. Yep. And I mean, that's every meal for me. And you think about it, I mean, when is the last time, if you have a well-prepared, nice steak, it's pretty rare you say, wow, this sucks. Now,
right.
Say, well, maybe I should be having pizza or ice cream or something I would miss. Because people ask me, what would you eat on a diet if you could add something else in? I said, well, I just eat some damn ice cream or a piece of cake because that's something I would actually enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't feel that I'm missing, I'm not missing out on any taste sensation by not eating broccoli or spinach. I just didn't like that stuff much in the first place. And I don't really find that bread and pasta, all that satisfying to me anymore.
It's kind of whatever. Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like this is what really satiates you and satisfies you. And I think there's an evolutionary reason for that. I mean, I think there is. I think the food industry has hacked into our satiety and appetite and our taste stuff and created this sort of food that kind of mimics what we're supposed to get. But in the end of the day, it leaves us feeling flat and short. And it's kind of like, it's just, I tell people, do you get tired of breathing the same air every day? And it's like, you don't want flavored air or multicolored air, or when you go to the bathroom, are you worried that it's always yellowish or clear yellow? I mean, you don't want it red or rainbow colored or green or blue. It's the same thing over and over. Eating is just a natural bodily physiologic function. Any animal in the wild, they have very, very little variety. I mean, they eat the same things over and over again for the most part. They only have access to maybe a handful of foods. And humans were like that probably for most of our evolution. It's only in the last, really 50 to 100 years that we've really had this just tremendous variety, and it's unnatural.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because I don't get bored of going to the gym every day. I go to the same gym every day. I actually do similar exercises on a weekly basis. I don't get bored of going to the same bed and sleeping in the same bed. Like, that's perfectly good for me. It's very comfortable. And speaking of sleep, I get a lot of questions of people that struggle with some insomnia, especially early on. Any recommendations for them?
Yeah, I mean, that is a common issue. And I think that early on, so a couple things are going on. I think one, people are just so energized. They just wired. They can't sleep. They've got so much energy. I think that's going on. I think some people, if they eat too close to bedtime, protein tends to stimulate you to deaminate that protein and get rid of it by ammonia to urea, and so you end up urinating. And so some people, just because they've eaten a big protein meal too close to bedtime, they end up having to wake up in the middle of the night because the bladder wakes them up. And I think that's going on. Obviously sleep hygiene is important. You got to make sure you're on point with that stuff. But I find that for me, if I eat a little earlier in the evening, so like maybe I'm eating dinner at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. rather than 8 or 9, and going to bed at 10 o'clock, then I sleep a lot better. I find that, again, this transition thing, once you kind of sort of, kind of come to this equilibrium with your energy, because your energy, may be very high when you're getting all this nutritious food, initially that may disrupt your sleep. I find that most people, and I found this myself, once you kind of get into it, my sleep latency is next to nothing. I mean, my bed, I hit the pillow and I'm out in like 10 minutes.
That's how I am.
You sit there and look at the ceiling, and it might be an hour before you fall asleep. I fall asleep like a rock, and I sleep consistently most nights, but it's a little reduced from what I used to sleep. So, I mean, or what I require, because I think I get 6.5, maybe 7 hours of sleep, and then I'm up. I mean, it's like 5 a.m. I'm like, boom, ready to go. And I'm rested and I can perform well. And I think that's in contrast to before, where you get up at 7 with the alarm clock and you're like, oh man, I'm so tired. And but I'm consistently energized and I consistently get good sleep. But in the beginning, I think there's some of that going on. And some of it's go ahead.
Yeah, do you think cortisol can play a role with lowered insulin, especially early on, and doing more gluconeogenesis to convert some of that into blood sugar and glycogen? These elevated cortisol later in the day, perhaps interfering with whether it's sleep latency or getting up earlier in the morning?
I mean, certainly. I mean, I don't doubt it could impact. I think there's going to be so many different things going on during the transition period. And yes, your insulin will almost always go down pretty significantly.
Yeah.
This is one of the most effective ways to reduce hyperinsulinemia. You probably have the lowest fasting insulins. And you probably have, if we were to look at an area under the curve on insulin, we probably see the lowest levels of insulin of any diet outside of maybe starvation, where you don't eat at all. But I mean, that's obviously not sustainable. So, is it, because people talk about this, this cortisol effect, and I think that is a transient effect during an adaptation.
That's what I feel like too.
Any diet, any major change in your diet is going to produce a stress response, and if I were to go on a vegan diet, my cortisol level would probably go up. First of all, it would be very stressful.
You might just die like instantly.
I could die instantly, but but I mean, I'm just saying that these people that again, this is a problem with short-term data. Like, I've seen people where they'll do a 3-day study on a diet. I'm like, what is the point of that? It's kind of like, there's so many things that occur over weeks and months that sort of normalize that. And so it'd be interesting to see cortisol levels on long-term carnivores, and maybe we can get that data, because most people don't check it. I've seen a handful of cortisol levels on people that sent me their labs, and it's generally been normal. But it's one of those things that's we have a lot of concerns that people will talk about just because they haven't studied something, and clinically it doesn't appear to be showing up, at least to any significant levels that I've seen so far.
Yeah, and one of the things I see is people have a tendency to take a hormone or something and label it as bad or good. So we label cortisol as bad. We label maybe IGF-1 as bad. We label insulin as bad. All these things play a role in the body, are very important for many, many processes. And just to label something good, bad is, we're often just one-sided, and that's a mistake. But so I had a couple of questions that I'm just interested in. And one is, as you train for Worlds, are you going into it, do you try and drop body weight to perform at your best, or are you trying to build up muscle? Like, what's your strategy going into that?
Yeah, so I mean, the event I'm going to be competing in is 500 meters, and so that is a combination of being very strong and also very fit. And so my goal obviously is to be, the ideal thing would be a lot of muscle, very little body fat, very, very fit. And so right now I am relatively lean, I'm relatively strong, and I'm relatively fit. And so I'm working on basically training. I'll be training some just basic heavy strength training movements to get stronger, probably mostly through my deadlift. I'll be training some very intense conditioning type things. Like right now, the event I'm focusing on is a 500 meter. But right now, my conditioning is for the 1,000 meter, because I want to, hopefully during the build up to this, I'll knock off a 1,000 meter world record in the build up. And so I'm kind of focusing on that aspect of it right now. And I get in there, and almost every time I get on the damn machine, it's a really hard effort. I mean, I don't like it. It's not fun. It's painful. I know there's going to be suffering every time I get on that thing. And so I'm working on it. But my eating strategy right now is I'm just listening to my appetite right now. I'm probably a little lighter than I want to be. I'd like to put on about 5 pounds of body weight.
Okay.
Hopefully it's more muscle and less fat, but that is one struggle I would say that people experience in a carnivore diet. It is tough to eat past satiety, and I think you need to eat past satiety to gain muscle after a certain point. Particularly at I'm almost 53. I've been training forever.
For more advanced trainers, yeah.
Right, it's tough, and so you've got to literally just eat till it literally becomes uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I mean, to put on muscle, and I think that's a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why carbohydrates, because it's easier to eat calories and carbohydrates than it is in meat in some cases, and that's why some of these athletes are really, really big guys. They may eat a lot of protein, a lot of meat, but they add that carbohydrate in, or just because they can get into that caloric surplus easier. It's not that you can't do it with meat, but you got to really be motivated to eat a lot, and sometimes it's not a fun deal.
All right, so I know we're running up on time here. One last question that I'm kind of curious about is, as someone that does a lot of writing, a lot of research, what was your writing process like for the book? I know it was a long process.
Yeah, I mean, I it was kind of went in spurts. I get inspired, and I would do like just a flow of thoughts and words, and it was kind of a start and stop type of thing. But particularly when dealing with a publisher, I would send this in, and the editor would say, you need more of this, we need to move this and that around. And like the part you talked about at the beginning, which was kind of my story, the autobiographical stuff, I didn't even have that in the book, and the publisher said you need to put something in. So I wrote a big long thing, and they ended up, I had a lot of sort of in your face, somewhat disturbing real life stuff from medicine, stuff I experienced in medicine and more. And they ended up saying, maybe that's a little too much for the average reader for a diet book. And so we ended up taking that out. And I'm kind of ambivalent about that. I understand we don't want to kind of disturb too many people. At the same time, it was good information, I thought. But,
the truth hurts sometimes. And I think, people are better off, if they feel that pain, but then, you see this is real life. This is what happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am not, like, I know we talked about, I don't really necessarily love writing. I mean, it's laborious. Right. It's not like I sit there and it's like fun. I'd rather go run around with my kids and exercise. And I like talking better. I mean, it's just, it's a job, it's work. And it's not something that I necessarily like. I love to write. I've never been a writer. I mean, I remember hating English class as a kid growing up. I was like, I don't like this stuff. I've got to, I can at least, I can do it if I need to.
Right.
And I think the book I wrote was accessible to a lot of people. And so I thought about it, the goal. I was like, who am I writing for? I'm not necessarily writing for people that know carnivore, that, I'm not trying to sort of deepen their knowledge tremendously, because I think what I want to do is reach the average mass with a compelling argument, make it accessible, make it understandable, and not bog them down with too many scientific details. Not that the book was short on science, there's plenty of that in there, but at the same time, I didn't want it to be a tome of, for just a minority of people. They're going to say, oh, look at this little study here, and this proves it. I think, again, the evidence speaks for itself. I mean, the results speak for themselves. And I think that's really what I'm trying to get out through the book.
Well, I think, as someone that's, studied a lot of this in quite depth, I'm super excited to read your book. And I know I might not be the target demographic that it's aimed at, but I think, one of my kind of tenets of life is like, if you're always learning like that, I mean, always be learning. And I'm sure I'm going to get stuff out of this book. I think, anyone that's done this diet for even any amount of time is going to get something out of it. And then, as you said, probably people that this is an introduction to this way of eating is probably going to get just a tremendous amount of value from it. We're at an hour. Thank you so much for the time. Like, this has been a real pleasure. Like I said, I am super excited to dive into the book. It's available now, right?
Yeah.
And the website's up. meatrx.com is up.
Yep, we're up. We were hit with like I said, we got inundated when we opened, and it slowed the server down, but I think we fixed that. My, like I said, the CTO fixed that. And so we are training. We've already trained several coaches. We're taking new ones in. We'll, hopefully get a cadre of coaches, and then we'll start getting clients. And like I said, I'm really serious about, disrupting and changing the way we look at health. And I think, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think this is one of the most effective things you can do for bringing health to people, short of just about any other intervention I can think of. And, if we can make it affordable to the masses and get that message out there, I think we're going to do a great service to our population. But yeah, that's it. But yeah,
you've done a great service to the population already. So, on behalf of everyone, thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Kevin. Same thing. Likewise with you. I like I said, the book is out, worldwide distribution. It's electronic, it's hard copy, and then we'll do a audible version coming up. I know the publishers, we've got that in the works, and then we'll probably end up getting translations, I would suspect, particularly if this does well, which it appears to be doing. So we'll probably have to translate it into several languages for people around the world to read it. And I think it'll hopefully be the kind of the entry point for many, hopefully even millions of people into the carnivore diet, which I think would be a great way to sort of really, put this information and bring it to the attention to the vast population and say, let's figure this stuff out, because we spend trillions of dollars and countless lives and suffering not doing the right thing. And I'd like to see that change.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. And again, thanks for the time. It was great to catch up again, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you sometime soon.
Perfect, Kim. Thanks.
All right. See you, Shawn.